So, motivation is defined as the process that initiates, guides, and maintains goal oriented behavior. It's a psychological process, right? So, a motive is the specific need or want, but motivation is a psychological process guiding that. So, motivation is what causes you to act in general. It involves the biological, emotional, social, cognitive, or thought related forces that activate behavior. So I'll tell you a story. This is one of my favorite stories to tell. When I was a freshman in college, after my freshman year, I got into a really bad car accident. The car accident caused me to need to take a semester off of school. Um, and I mentioned this before. I called Mizzou. They were really, really great about maintaining my scholarship. No worries there. My next call was to who at that time was one of my better friends. We went to Mizzou together. I would argue she's the reason I went to Mizzou, her pushing me to apply. Um, anyway, to tell her that, I was taking a semester off, and so unlike the original plan, there were five of us who were going to move in together. I wasn't going to be able to move in for at least a semester because I needed to take the semester off. Rather than providing any kind of sympathy or empathy, she was a complete jerk face and gave me this spiel about how if I take this semester off, I was never going to go back to Mizzou. I was probably going to ruin my life and end up in Kansas City doing nothing, so on and so forth. I tell you what, nothing in life has ever motivated me like that conversation, right? So, towards the end of kind of my semester off, I was like, maybe I should stay in Kansas City, be closer to my family. But every time I had that thought, I was like, no, 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 I'm going back. I'm going back to prove her wrong. I know, petty, but it got good results, I guess. Yeah, so there's that. So I am going to talk briefly enough about some motivational theories. One thing to keep in mind with these theories is that we don't have a parsimonious theory of motivation, right? So each of these theories is true, but they don't explain all motivation, right? So they might explain some aspect of motivation, but it doesn't explain kind of why it's so hard for you to get out of bed on a Monday, or how, we can strive to make employees more efficient, or kind of get students to pay attention to class or even come to class. You want a motivational theory that can do all of those things. We don't have it yet, but what we do have, I guess I should say, are these motivational theories that describe some aspect of motivation. The first theory is the instinct theory. It is a pretty old theory, and it just basically says motivation comes from evolutionary programming, right? So, maybe women are more or less emotional, however you want to say that, because of evolutionary programming. And there's some evidence for this. I mean, I hate to be morbid, but you could look at, I tend to be interested in like serial killer shows and murder shows and stuff like this. And one of the things they talk about is that women will often choose indirect methods of killing someone, whereas men are pretty direct. This is also true about suicide, right? Men are more likely to die from suicide because they choose a very direct method of killing themselves. They'll shoot themselves. Whereas women are less likely to shoot themselves. They might cut themselves or overdose on pills, things like this. It doesn't work out. They get their stomach pumped, yada yada. They don't die. Similarly, women are more likely to use poison to kill someone or try something like poison, whereas men again are more direct. They're more likely to just shoot someone, and maybe that is evolutionary programming. Sorry, that was very morbid, but that was the example that came to mind. What can I say? Another motivational theory is the incentive theory. People are motivated to do things because of external rewards. And again, that does describe some things. Maybe you go above and beyond at your job because you get a bonus, or maybe you just even go to work because you get paid, right? How many people would not work if there was no paycheck attached? Drive theory says that there is this internal tension that people have that's caused by unmet needs. It causes this drive or motivation to get you to do something. Arousal theory of motivation, people take certain actions to either decrease or increase their levels of arousal. The humanistic theory, which Maslow's hierarchy of needs falls under, says that people have cognitive reasons to perform certain actions. You want to start and do all of these things until you get up to self actualization. And you are, again, cognitively thinking how you get there and what it takes to get there, so on and so forth. And last but not least, the expectancy theory of motivation. So behavior is pulled by expectations of achieving desirable outcomes, rather than pushed from within. The problem, of course, with expectancy theory is that there are some motivations that are pushed from within, right? So you could say, taking care of your kids, right? So, I mean, I hate to say this, but like ultimately, let's be honest, some people have children because they say, "Oh, I want them to take care of me when I get older." But some people just have kids because, they want to have kids. Um, yeah, and specifically all the little actions that it takes to raise a child, changing diapers, doing all these things, and being really anxious if your kid cries. I would argue that some of that doesn't have this clear cut incentive, and yet we do it. I'm going to talk about motivation a bit more, and you can see some of these theories and some of the things I say, which is great, right? So, for example, in my next slide, I'll be talking about arousal, and you can look at, the arousal theory, or think back to the arousal theory of motivation. So I'm briefly going to discuss drive theory, or the motivational process, in terms of drive theory. I'm going to do so because a lot of people understand drive theory a little bit more, and because some people use drive theory as their theoretical foundation when they're talking about the motivation process. Not all people and not every time, but drive theory tends to be a pretty big theory when we're talking about motivation. So, according to drive theory, we have these unfulfilled wants or needs. They create tension, right? Because you have this gap between what you want to be happening, or what you want to have happened, and what is occurring. And that creates some motive, right? I want to do X because I believe it will, help me fulfill my needs and or wants, right? This motive. That motive then spurs behavior, which then kind of creates this goal or need fulfillment. One thing to remember is that, there are things that kind of lessen or strengthen the behavior, right? The relationship between the motive and the behavior. Your perception can do that. Your personality can do that. Your motivation in general can do that. Your learning process or learnings can do that. So, for example, it could be that what you really want to do, if you're me, right, like Cassandra Davis, one of the things that I really miss about pre-COVID life is going to coffee shops and working in coffee shops. I love that. And I want to get back to that. I want to get back to going to coffee shops to work. And so, that's a motive that I have. The behavior then would be actually going to the coffee shops. However, my personality is that I'm risk averse, right? I don't like risk. And so that stopped me from going to coffee shops frequently in the last, I would say, 3 months. My perception is also standing in the way a bit, moderates this relationship, because I do perceive that the pandemic is still happening, and that despite my, vaccine, I could still, you know, um, have or get COVID, which is very scary for me because I have some pre-existing conditions. And so, because of those things, it has modified the behavior. Have I gone to coffee shops? Yes, I have, actually. In the last 2 months, I've gone a couple of times. Have I gone as much as I want? No, I have not. I absolutely have not. And so, anyway, just knowing that, that's the process, or walking you guys through the process. that's what drive theory typically looks like. So I talked about this idea of tension, this gap between your current state, these unfulfilled needs or wants, and your desired state. We typically define tension as the degree of arousal that a consumer may have due to a discrepancy between their present state and their ideal state. Think about how that really kind of mimics what we talked about when we talked about needs, right? That we have this gap, and that gap creates, tension. It creates action. It creates the desire to do something, so on and so forth. Before we go any further, I want to talk about the difference between motivation and motive. Those words are often used interchangeably, even though they are not the same thing exactly, right? I would never walk up to someone and say, hey, you're using that word wrong. But just so that we have a more finite understanding or definitive understanding between the two. Earlier, I said that motivation is a process, right? And it is. It's a psychological process that typically refers to your willingness to act, right? Motivation gives you a willingness to do something. A motive, on the other hand, is a concrete cause of your behavior, right? I'll give you an example to kind of differentiate those, and it involves being thirsty. So let's say you're in class, right? And you are super thirsty, right? You really want to get something to drink. That is your motivation. You're motivated to get something to drink because you're super thirsty, right? On the other hand, while you look around and you say, I need to quench my thirst, when you're in class, let's say at the Illich School, your options aren't really that great, right? You can walk out of class and try to find a water, what do you call those? Water dispenser, whatever you call them. Water fountain is what you call them. You can walk out of class and try to find a water fountain. But you may be in a situation where there are no water fountains around, right? Maybe you'll have to go 4 flights up the stairs. That's an exaggeration. There aren't really 4 flights up the stairs that you can go. I think the max you can go is up 3 flights of stairs, but whatever. So let's say you just really do not want to go up those flights of stairs to get the water, right? The other thing you could you could do is on the first floor, there is a vending machine, right? And you can get water out of that or something to drink out of that. But let's say you have no money, right? So your options are you have no money, so you can't go get something from the vending machine or elsewhere. The only thing you can do is get up and go get some water, and maybe water just isn't that appealing. And so you have no real desire to act. On the other hand, let's say you're flush with cash, you do have cash on you, and for a fact downstairs one of the a vendor has come in, and they're doing a little pop-up in the business school, which happens actually. And they're selling, let's say, smoothies, and you're all about smoothies, right? And so for you, the concrete motive here is you want to go get a smoothie. So that smoothie is the concrete cause of you getting up and walking out of class and going and buying a smoothie. That is an example. I highly don't recommend people walk out of class and come back with a smoothie, but that's an example of a motive versus motivation. So, motivational direction. So, as you know, most goals can be reached by a number of paths, right? If I have a goal to entertain myself tonight, I could watch some Thursday night football. I could get on my fantasy football team and see what's going on. Uh, I should say league, and see what's going on. I could go out for drinks. The variety of things I can do. The objective of marketers then is to convince consumers that the alternative that they offer provides the best chance to obtain that or attain that goal. And so the NFL definitely wants me to watch Thursday night football, or to get on the fantasy league and kind of participate that way. Bars and restaurants in the city definitely want me to decide that I want to go out to eat or go out for drinks. Um, Same is true everywhere, right? Other bars and restaurants in other parts of the city or other parts of other cities like Ferndale or Royal Oak might want me to come there, right? That's the goal of their marketing efforts, to convince me that that's where I want to be, and that being there can help me attain my goal of relieving any boredom that I might have this evening. We often tend to think that we absolutely want to have the highest level of motivation possible. We want to be um, so aroused by whatever tension that's going on, right? Whatever the discrepancy it is between kind of where we are now and where we want to be, that we are willing to act and act strongly and immediately, and we're super motivated, right? So, maybe you um, do something like need to save up money for a car, right? So maybe you need to save up money for a car, and you need the car over the summer. So you need to be extra motivated right now to get enough money to save up for a car, right? And people are like, "Ooh, I'm glad this is lighting a fire under you," right? The problem is that research has shown that when people have too much arousal, right? Too much arousal, too much tension, um, it can be problematic, right? So, and when people have too little arousal, it can be problematic, right? So, if you have a low level of arousal, and I'm using kind of this car example, you need a car by the summer, but you have very little arousal, you have very little tension in terms of kind of getting this car, you probably won't raise a lot of money um, because you'll just kind of your arousal will be so low that you just kind of ignore your motivation to do well. On the other hand, if the tension or arousal is too high, you will probably have trouble raising money as well, because your performance may be impaired by anxiety. Yeah, you want to do everything you can to make money. At the same time, you're so anxious that you're not going to make any money. It makes you never really want to go to work or get out of bed, blah, 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 blah. So, according to Yerkes-Dodson, they call this the Yerkes-Dodson law, the optimal level of arousal that results in optimal performance is a medium or moderate amount of arousal. So, you want a moderate amount of tension, right, to motivate you to do something. So, for example, let's say you have to take a test and you have this tension or arousal to do well. If the tension or arousal is too low, you might be like the stick figure and not and just go to sleep, and so your performance is quite poor because you don't really study, and the test doesn't turn out well. On the other hand, let's say, you have a test and your tension or arousal is quite high. There's a chance you might do poorly as well because you have this strong level of anxiety around doing well on this test. You can't remember anything. It's hard for you to concentrate because you're just so anxious about doing well on the test. Again, according to the Yerkes-Dodson law, you really want to be somewhere in the middle. You want to study for the test. You want to feel like you need to do well, but you don't want to like bludgeon yourself over it. You don't want to um, reach the point where you're so focused on it that it causes some level of anxiety. So I think this article is pretty interesting. It's a HBR article, like most of the articles that I talk about, if they're not completely academic articles, a lot of them come from Harvard Business Review, which is just a synopsis of academic articles. Really, I've said this before. Anyway, so. What this article talks about is this idea of motivation, and specifically, it talks about the fact that John Deere measures employee morale every 2 weeks, right? They want to know what's going on, how motivated you are, how you feel about things. And I think they only use one question, sometimes maybe a few more, And their argument is, and this makes a lot of sense to me, they have a lot of competitors now. And we know that John Deere has done some kind of interesting things to kind of um, stop competition, which is actually kind of hurting them in the long run. So, one thing that John Deere has been doing, the side note, is that they've made their computer systems proprietary, meaning that other companies can't come in and fix a John Deere. You have to go through them, which is problematic for a lot of farmers because it costs quite a bit. And so, if you look on blogs and websites, they have all of these people who are like, here's how to hack the John Deere system. And then you also have some people who've decided to just not buy any new John Deere. They're just keeping their old ones for as long as possible. But that's a side note. Again, those are the kind of things that could be affecting their John Deere sales. And John Deere's idea of measuring morale every 2 weeks, or their rationale, I should say, is that they want to know up front, before problems, snowball and become bigger, if there are any problems with people, teams, so on and so forth, because a happy or motivated group are more likely to have higher levels of performance. This makes a lot of sense to me, in terms of why they're measuring morale. I know that when I first got to Wayne, I was really impressed because we received a campus climate survey, and I thought to myself, wow, this is a school that, really cares about the climate on campus. I'll be honest, I really haven't heard much of kind of what they did with that survey. I know they posted the results online so I can look them up, and I did look them up, but I'm not sure kind of what the effects of, or what the outcomes are associated with that survey. But, some people just have this kind of positive reaction to just having a survey in and of itself because it makes you feel like your company or organization supports you. So that's something to kind of keep in mind.